Welcome to this IACL Welcome to this next module on the IACL contact lens curriculum. This is module A6, corneal oxygenation during contact lens wear. We do know, of course, that the atmosphere contains something like 21% oxygen, with the bulk of the rest of atmospheric gases nitrogen. The amount of partial pressure, which is the best way to describe oxygen at the corneal surface, will vary by altitude. So here in Manchester at sea level, the partial pressure of oxygen is 155 millimeters of mercury, but this varies. Our colleagues in Denver or Mexico City or La Paz, Bolivia, have patients who have partial pressures of oxygen rather lower than this value. This slide shows the situation of oxygen partial pressure through the cornea when there is no lens worn. Of course, as we get deeper into the cornea, as we move to the left on this slide, then the availability of oxygen diminishes. It's, of course, at its maximum at the front of the cornea, in front of the epithelium or at the tear film. So partial pressure then around 155 millimeters of mercury at the front of the cornea during open eye conditions, and this diminishes as we move through the cornea, and it's at its lowest point at the endothelium, where it reaches a value of about 55 millimeters of mercury. Now, when the eye is closed, such as overnight, of course, the lid as a physical barrier will reduce the amount of oxygen at the surface of the eye, and in fact, the partial pressure of oxygen throughout the cornea during eye closure is almost constant at something close to 50 millimeters of mercury. This slide shows the situation when various contact lens types are worn. So lenses A, B, C, and D, as shown here, are having various impacts on corneal oxygenation. For physiology, really, what we need is just some oxygen present. It doesn't really matter the precise partial pressure of oxygen. Normal physiology is maintained almost normally as long as there's some oxygen available. What you can see here is that lens A has a minimal impact on the oxygen partial pressures throughout the cornea. The profile there for lens A is not very different than what we saw on the previous slide for open eye conditions. And lenses B, C, and D show progressively poorer oxygen transmissibility of the lens, such that in D, looks like they're in fact we're just about getting to a hypoxic state in the corneal epithelium, you can see, because the level of oxygen is at 0 or 0 millimeters of mercury. An important question is what level of oxygen transmissibility is required for normal corneal physiology, and this is classically described here in the Holden-Mertz paper from 1984. In this work, they recruited a series of subjects and looked at the effect on corneal thickness during the day with different forms of contact lens, where the contact lenses are varying in terms of their oxygen transmissibility characteristics, or their DK on T. And the first data point, the high data point on the chart that you can see there, is when they fitted their subjects with a lens with very low DK, something around 5 DK over T units. Then during the day, the cornea swelled by 9%. That is, there was an increase in corneal thickness of that value. And as we move to the right on this slide, and we start to fit lenses with increasing oxygen performance characteristics, then the amount of swelling diminishes, and they fitted a line through that set of data and found that line reached 0 at 24 units. So this became the Holden-Mertz criterion for daily wear. That is a lens of DK over T of 24. It causes no increase in corneal thickness during the day. This value has changed or is different when we look at different literature. Various approaches have been used over the past 40 years to address this question, with the value for the required amount of DK over T varying, in fact, from between about 20 units and 300 units, an enormous span of values there. Some extra reading that you might be interested in here, and that concludes this presentation on oxygenation of the cornea during contact lens wear.